This is Mary. This is her most iconic sort of look.
Old mate James is more like, let's enjoy some snacks and
Yes.
then we'll shag.
Ladies wouldn't wear makeup.
Really?
It was more prostitutes that would use it.
This is for George. This is our main boy. Like a kind of modern capsule wardrobe.
It feels right. Junk in the trunk there. Oh my God, I love it. This might be my look.
This is Jacobean history, but not as you know it. This is Mary and George and me. Beyond the backstabbing and banqueting, the other ever-present theme in this odyssey through Jacobean England is sex. What I've gleaned thus far is that the power of sexual desire has played a huge but underreported part in history. Luckily for us, contemporary sleuths like sex historian Kate Lister are throwing back the sheets to reveal a much fuller picture of what was really going on in the bedchambers of those who shaped our modern world.
Why is it important to look at sex from the perspective of a historian in particular?
Well, how important is sex today, right? It's something that we still obsess about and we talk about and we endlessly pore over and people research and everyone's got opinions. Well, it's been like that as long as people have been having sex.
Yeah.
So it's important that we know, first of all, what, or as close as we can get to know what was going on in people's bedrooms of yore, but how we've ended up where we are right now.
Yeah.
That's important. How have the attitudes that we have today, have they always been the same or have they changed? Like how were gay, bisexual people viewed in the past?
Yeah.
And that's really, really important. I think understanding sex, that's how you understand humans and human history.
Absolutely. Can you paint a sort of broad picture for us about what sex lives were like in the Jacobean era?
It depends who you were. Money always talks, so the more money, the more power, the more influence you have, the more sex of the whatever it is that you want to do, you can do that. But there were very strict punishments in place for regular, everyday people. The church said things like you can't have sex on Advent or Lent or Wednesdays or Sundays or feast days or before menstruation or after you've been pregnant. And like when you actually add it all up, you could have sex for like 2 days a year.
Only in ovulation.
And yet...
They're like, it's for getting pregnant.
That's what they taught. It's like, it's for getting pregnant and you should have as little fun as you possibly can do while you're actually having it. That was the church's take. Now, that doesn't mean that anyone listened.
In Mary and George, rule-breaking is turned into something of an art form, presenting a new vision of Jacobean sexuality captured from a distinctly modern perspective.
How did you design the sexual cadence of the show?
The characters are very sexually liberated. The characters do not hesitate in having sex. With George and the king, when we meet the king, all we know is that he likes orgies, and there are lots of orgies that we shot. And that was a journey for me in terms of inventing many different sexual positions.
You were like, we've done that one.
Yeah,
sorry, you could do bingo with it, maybe.
We had our intimacy coordinator literally had to come with like loads of diagrams and be like, so we've done that one, you can do this one.
I also love the idea of everyone looking at that, being like, wow, okay.
In fact, the very last day that Tony and Nick worked together, it was a scene with me and it was them having sex under a tree. And because we'd been shooting for 6 months, we literally all stood there going, what haven't we done? We've been very excited about the fact that we've hopefully show the world the many different ways two men can have sex.
So in the show, there's a lot of bonking going on. There's orgies, there's everyone's sort of at it, everyone's got side lovers. How accurate is that in terms of history?
We're not the first ones to have invented sex. There would certainly been mass orgies occurring somewhere and people having all kinds of sex. We just don't have the documents to prove it. It's very rare to find like an I went to an orgy ticket slip from the 17th century that we go, that definitely happened.
Yeah.
It's really easy to look at the past and think that everyone was really repressed and prudish, but these people would have been a lot more familiar with sex and naked bodies than we are today in ways that we can't really conceive of. Like space, for example. Families would probably be growing up in one room, so you would probably have been aware of your parents having sex because they'd have been in the bed next to you. You would certainly have seen everybody naked, and if you went into work, like if you were a servant or something like that, you would be sharing rooms and sharing close quarters. So you would see people getting undressed.
Yeah.
You would probably see people having sex in ways that today would be a little bit strange to us.
Yeah, I guess just by proximity.
By proximity, right?
Sadly, no tickets to the orgy were available, so I've gone with the next best option, a trip to a very glamorous studio, where King James and George took a minute out of their busy lovemaking schedule to reflect upon their characters' expansive sex lives, where spouses and lovers were all carefully attended to. What are the main things I can learn about sex and relationships in the Jacobean era from watching?
More the merrier. I'd say
It's okay to have a threesome.
Don't limit it at 3.
Don't limit yourself
Bump
to
those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. You need
Monogamy.
at least 12, 13 people. You want to get lost in limbs.
It's a snake pit.
It's a snake pit.
James at the time when I first read it, he was obviously a man who was fluid. You know, I had a wife, Anne of Denmark. He had 9 children, 3 only made it to adulthood. Obviously there was a marriage of convenience there, but his sensuality, his sexuality, he liked men and he fell in love with, you know, not a handful, but he had his favourites. At the time there was no terminology. People just did what they did, and I guess because he was the king, he was not a fan of politics, he was not a fan of going to court, he was a fan of hunting, he was a fan of the arts, of writing, and he was a fan of making love, I guess.
He's
as
a
well.
very modern man.
There you go. Fuck me alive again.
In the 1600s, was there the identity politics around that exists today?
They didn't have language. Like today you'd say, I am gay, or you'd come out. Gay today is an identity. Your sexuality, you'd say, I'm straight, I'm gay, I'm bi, whatever it is. When we're talking about this period in the 17th century, it's not so much part of your identity, so much as something that you do. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't what we now call a gay community. We know that there was language being used. Catamites, sodomite, mollies was a very affectionate term used within the queer community. Lesbians were known as tribads and fricatrisses. So there what?
Come again?
Fricatrice.
Fricatrisses.
Friction.
Oh, great.
So we know that this language existed. We know that these communities existed, but it wasn't as open as it is today. But people knew, like there was satirical pamphlets about James and his many lovers written all the time. Like courtiers talk about it, joke about it. There was an ongoing joke at the time of Elizabeth was the king and now James is the queen. And then they all fall about laughing. So it was...
I fell for it too.
Right? It's very clever.
Were you surprised to learn that about Jacobean times, that they were so fluid?
The sort of fluidity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because I think we obviously, you know, as modern people in the 21st century, we consider ourselves, you know, at the forefront of being liberal and conceptual about all these things.
Yeah.
And for George, it's like his sex and his ability to be so fluid, you know, it's his power in a lot of ways. His ability to kind of slip into, you know, different modes to kind of accomplish what he needed to accomplish.
What do you think his motivation is?
He's driven by this matriarch in Mary. You know, he is, everything he does is to kind of achieve some semblance of validation in Mary's eyes. But then I think as he goes along, he realizes that he can attain power by himself, and then it just becomes this voracious appetite for the wealth and you know, climbing within this court. You know, the higher you climb, the more that is possible, and
The more you get laid.
A bonk fest.
It's a bonk fest.
What's your take on their relationship?
In the beginning, when I read the show and I got to understand the nature of James, King James, he's sort of, you meet him as a sort of buffoon in a sense. You know, the first time you meet him, he's naked and walking around with an erection in episode 1. But by episode 3 and 4, he deepens as a character and you realize that he's a very complicated man and he does very much love George. And then from George's side, you sense that he too is in love with James in his way. And I remember when we researched the show, we were made aware of these letters that James had sent George over time, and the nature of those letters and the language of those letters are very clearly a love relationship.
I think the letters I wrote, he was deeply in love. He was in love with a few men in his time. There was a gentleman in Scotland called Lord Lennox as well. I think his romantic exploits and sensual, sexual exploits were an escapism, most definitely. And plus the fact that, you know, his father was blown up, Lord Darnley. His mother, Mary Queen of Scots, was decapitated by Queen Elizabeth. And he was raised by a bunch of men, a bunch of regents. They all wanted a piece of him, you know. So it is very much, you know.
Fuck the pain away. Really.
heavy sleeps the head that wears the crown, as it were. If I am Prometheus, you are the eagle plucking at my liver.
King James I, obviously partial to a male love affair. How did that influence his decisions in terms of lawmaking?
He actually strengthens the sodomy laws. He argues that there shouldn't be any room for interpretation in these cases, that judges should just execute people straight away.
But I thought it was like an open secret to those around him that he was enjoying this.
It doesn't seem to have been particularly ashamed of this at all, and yet when it comes to other people, he was vicious.
The fact that he was falling in love with men, I thought of that era as being kind of more open.
So we know that by the 18th century, there is a molly house culture in London. It probably existed much before that, we just don't have the records. A molly house wasn't quite a brothel, it wasn't quite a tavern.
Oh.
It was somewhere between them. This is an underground, secretive, marginalised group of people who will pay a huge price if they get caught.
And was it only for queer people? Or
It was for queer men. A woman wasn't allowed to go into a bar. We know that women were having sex with women, definitely. I'd have put money on it, that there were lesbian gatherings of women, but it would have been behind closed doors and you'd have to know someone who knew someone who knew somebody. They were just better at hiding it.
Reflective of this feminine cunning, in Mary and George, Mary is having her own illicit love affair across forbidden lines of gender and class.
Mary particularly is probably the more exciting journey, I guess, as a character, because you make an assumption, I think, about her sexuality at the start of the show, and she kind of defies that. And her major love relationship in the show is with another woman. The sexual nature of it is incredibly liberated and exploratory and unapologetic.
Mary's conducting a little business in a brothel, and she meets this enchanting young woman, played by Niamh Algar, named Sandy. She challenges her and interests her, and they end up in a relationship together.
And it's interesting that there's this tenderness with a female relationship that she maybe doesn't experience through her male relationship.
Right. I think she feels a sense of equality with her. And in a society and in a world where she feels so dominated by the male figures in her life and so powerless, here she meets someone who recognizes her for what she is and is able to kind of meet her head on.
Were you surprised when you first got this script to see sexuality in the Jacobean era being represented in this way?
No.
You're like, humans are humans.
People have sex. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, right? None of us would be here if they didn't.
Why then has history, or mainstream history, kind of focused on this sort of straight perspective then? Why has so much of it been eradicated?
History tends to be told from the perspective of people who've written it, and throughout most of our history, the people repeating it have been within a very heteronormative society. Even if they thought they were gay, they'd probably struggle to actually say that. You're going to out the king?
Yeah.
Are you? You know, so it's not that, I mean, it has been straight-washed, it has, and we're now in the process of reclaiming it. But I think maybe we're just ready to have those conversations in a way that we haven't been before.
How important do you think it is to have this incredible historical queer story living today?
For me personally, of course, it's really important to make inclusive stories where we look back in history and tell stories in a way that includes people and highlights the fact that our assumptions about the past aren't as clear as we thought they were. So that's really fun. But I also think it's important to not drive that home too much, because I think the real sign of inclusion is to not have to label it all the time.
Right.
And Mary and George does not spend its time trying to educate the audience about queerness or trying to advertise it as a primary. I think what's really great about it is that we make it as part of it, and it's not the reason for the show. And the nature of the characters in the show are allowed to be who they are, and we don't vilify them for it, and we don't sort of highlight them in a way that makes it seem like we're trying to be preachy about it.